Hi, everybody, and welcome to week 2 in public relations. So, this is a very important week because we transition from monitoring to doing. And before you can do, you obviously have to have intelligence of what's going on around you, which is why we do monitoring in week 1. So, week 2, we're going to begin the process of now doing something. And what are we going to do? Well, what I want to talk to you about is the fact that basically the entire world revolves around news stories. Now, news stories can be one of two types. They can either be real or they can be pseudo, meaning that they're somewhat false. I guess there's no other way to describe that. Or maybe a better way to put it is that pseudo means that it's contrived. And think about this. You know, when I was growing up, we had 3 main stations, and then we had 3 stations that were on a different broadcast band, the UHF band, that we were able to get. And because we had an outside antenna that you could rotate, we had a motor, and on certain days we could turn it because we were not quite halfway between Philadelphia and New York, but we were definitely, moving in the direction towards New York, even though we were closer to Philadelphia. But if we seemed to get the right bounce and the antenna positioned just precisely pointing the right direction, we could actually pick up 2 of New York's big stations on the UHF band. And that was always fun because they had some, what I thought at the time, much better programming. But any way you slice it or dice it, basically we were looking at three sources for news. Now, here's something else to remember. That back then, news wasn't 24/7. News was about an hour and a half max each day. There weren't even morning programs to be shown. So you got your news, you got local news in the afternoon, and then in the evening, right before prime at 7:30 normally, you get a half hour of network national news. And that's where people, TV stars, if you will, folks like Walter Cronkite and Chet I'm trying to think, Brinkley and Hunter Brinkley, David Brinkley and Chet Hunter, Brinkley and Hunter. They were the NBC nightly news, and I think it was David K. Smith way back in the day with ABC News. My folks always listened to Huntley and Brinkley. It wasn't Hunter, it was Huntley. Chet Huntley and David Brinkley. Or we listened to Walter Cronkite. I remember very specifically for the moon launch, which was when did man land on the moon? Quick little bit of trivia here. We landed on July 20th, 1969, and I distinctly remember listening to Walter Cronkite most of the night. It's funny, for election news, we always would tune into Huntley and Brinkley, but for other events, we seem to listen to CBS and Walter Cronkite. That's the way it was. July 20th, 1969. That was how he would end his stories. Or actually his broadcast. Well, there was limited broadcast back then. In fact, TVs went off the air usually around 2 o'clock in the morning and didn't come back on till 6 or 7 in the morning. So there was a lot of dark time. The last thing that was shown on most channels before they went dark was they would play the national anthem and show a clip of the American flag flying. That was the way that we consumed news back when I was growing up. Today, we look at the number of channels and sources that are available. It's mind-boggling. We have direct TV, so we get all the direct TV channels, but I'm actually beginning to consider whether I really need direct TV, because through the internet, I look at networks such as Plex or Samsung Smart Plus or Pluto, or there's a number of others. And the number of channels that are coming in is just, it's crazy. And those are all free channels. I don't have to pay for it. So what we have, give me 1 second. Guys, you need to sit down. You're going to fall. My dachshund puppies were they were looking for some attention earlier, so I put them on the desk in their bed, and they were starting to lean over and look down and saying, "Oh, I could jump that far." No, you can't. Do I need to bring you guys down? Yeah, I've got one crawling all over the place, so let me. This is Fletcher, or Fletch as he's known. Let's say hi to everybody. You going to be good if I put you down? Yes, you will. And let me get your brother. Come here, bud. Oh. And this is the Flying Flynn. Say hi to everybody. There you go. Down you go. So one of the neat things about this pandemic is the ability to work at home, and the ability, you get to see what I look like in my natural environment with the pups. I've got one other that's a border collie, but I can't pick him up. He's a little too big. Okay. So back we go. I'm telling you all this because today we have many, many, many more hours of broadcast space that need to be filled. There's not enough real news to fill all that broadcast space. So what happens? Well, we start to manipulate things and we create stories. In fact, what we're actually doing is much what happens in marketing and advertising. We're developing something that can be promoted, that can be talked about, that can be shared. And in advertising, we call that the creative. And then we pay people to distribute the creative. In public relations, we create newsworthy events, either real or pseudo events. And then what do? We look for people to tell those stories for us, without us necessarily having to pay them to do that. So that is the world of public relations. So this week we're going to be creating a press release. Now there's several things that we need to do. If you've got your case study company, I don't want you to look for something that your case study company has done with regard to a press release. Because guess what? There are many public relations professionals out there that write horrible press releases that really have no clue what they're doing. If you want to use something that your company has done and they've done something, then fine. But chances are your company is not going to have done anything recent that you can then take and build on, if you will. So you might as well start thinking now about pseudo events and how can I create a pseudo event. Now let me give you a story. I'm trying to think, what book do I have handy that has a good story in it? Doobie. Let's see. This is what happens when one of the dogs reads the book. It gets dog covered, dog eared, dog eared pages. It's not pretty. I've got a replacement coming, but And the book I really wanted to share with you, I'm not seeing. That worries me. It's a book called The Image. It's by Daniel Borstein. And he actually tells the story of Edward Bernays, and I believe it's the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. The Mayflower had hired Bernays to promote the hotel because it was in decline. And they were, trying to decide, do we need to remodel? Do we, what kind of promotions can we offer? And they brought in Edward Bernays. So the time frame for this is really the first half of the 20th century, like 1924 to maybe 1948, somewhere in that range. I know it's a wide window, but that's the time period. And what they decided, what Bernays decided, he said, really what we have here is we have a hotel that's been an integral part of the Washington establishment for 100 years almost, because it was their 100th birthday coming up. And he said, Washington needs to thank you. That was a spam call coming in over the computer. That's interesting. So Bernays says what we should do is we need to have the city of Washington recognize the role that you've played, meaning the hotel's played, in the history of the city, and all the famous people that you've hosted and meetings that have been held here and so forth and so on. So Bernays goes to the city of Washington and says, the Mayflower Hotel has been here. It's their 100th birthday coming up. And when you think this is almost as much a landmark as any of the other landmarks in Washington, D.C., and wouldn't it be great for the city to recognize the Mayflower Hotel? And so Bernays was able to convince, it was much more complicated than that, but that's the Reader's Digest or the short version. He was able to convince the city that they should put together a celebration in order to have the Mayflower Hotel recognized for its role and its importance in the development not only of the city but of the country, that it in and of itself was a Washington landmark. And so the city did this. They proclaimed Mayflower Day, Mayflower Hotel Day, parades, banners. It was incredible. And what happened was it was basically a rebirth for the Mayflower Hotel, which if you go to Washington, D.C. today, you could still stay at the Mayflower just down the street and around the corner from the White House. So that was a pseudo event. Without Bernays orchestrating everything, who would have cared if the Mayflower Hotel celebrated 100 years? Nobody. But he was able to take some bits and pieces of real things and turn it into a pseudo event. So Mayflower Hotel Day in Washington, D.C. did not exist before Bernays. Bernays made it a pseudo event. That's what you're going to be challenged with many times in your career, is coming up with pseudo events. Now, I like to tell the story and it never fails because somebody always eats it. When I was VP of C&H Rao Jewelers back in the 80s, I was doing some research and had come upon some newspaper articles about an event that my boss ran several years earlier. And that event was about him creating a gold lollipop for Telly Savalas that was presented to Telly Savalas. Now, Telly Savalas was an actor who was famous for always sucking on a lollipop at the Kentucky Derby. Telly Savalas had a horse that was eligible to run in the Derby and then was disqualified in the last week or two leading up to the actual race. And that horse's name was Telly's Pop. My boss was able to create and then present. He had the governor of the state of Kentucky present the lollipop, since the governor was, I believe, the grand marshal for the Kentucky Derby that year, and that was a pseudo event. Tons and tons of press. One of the hallmarks of a pseudo event is the fact that you can take a pseudo event and run it numerous times. So, probably about 6-7 years later, I'm doing my monitoring, and I see that Telly Savalas is giving the commencement address at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, which is where our home office is. And the address is going to be in May. It's going to be held in, graduation will be held in Commonwealth Stadium, which was the football stadium. And I had the fun idea of, let's do Telly Savalas' lollipop twice. I'm pretty sure Telly Savalas is the only person on the planet to have received a gold lollipop twice. He may be the only one on the planet to have received one once, but definitely twice was a new thing. So what we did is reached out to the University of Kentucky. We said, how would you like to thank Telly Savalas for the commencement address with a gold lollipop, Tootsie Roll Pop? And I've got somebody coming back for a visit. He wants to hear this story. He never gets tired of hearing the Tootsie Roll story, do you? So Telly Savalas comes to town, and we were able to present Telly with another gold lollipop. And then I put some icing on top of it. And this is my weird sense of humor. One of my favorite sitcoms was WKRP in Cincinnati, and the favorite of favorite episodes is when they did a turkey drop. Look this up on YouTube. I think I've got a video that you may look at where I share this with you too, but it's certainly available on YouTube. And they dropped frozen turkeys from a helicopter. Well, I didn't drop frozen lollipops, but I did have a helicopter drop, oh cripes, it must have been 5,000 Tootsie Pops on one of the adjacent fields at Commonwealth Stadium. And people were able, after the commencement, to go pick up lollipops, and the wrappers on the lollipops, can't remember whether it was the wrapper or the stick. We had talked about doing one or the other. Are you good? And I just can't remember anymore, to be honest with you. But what we did is we printed on one of those medium that the stick or the wrapper was good for a 10% discount at any C&H Rao store. Now, C&H Rao, most of our stores were in Kentucky. They were in small communities, usually less than 5,000 in population, which back in the 80s, that was what made up the demographic of students at the University of Kentucky. Students from all over the state in these small towns, there was a great desire for them to go to the big university in Lexington, which was the University of Kentucky. And so this was a great place to give out coupons, because all these people went back to their local local communities where there was a C&H Rao jeweler sitting. At the time, I think I had maybe 58 stores, with probably about 80% of them in the state of Kentucky. So I saturated Kentucky pretty well. Okay, so that was a pseudo event that was orchestrated, and it was tied into a giveaway. Now, we didn't pay for any of this in terms of paying for advertising. Everything was done via press release. Normally, when you run a sale, basically we ran a sale, right? 10% off. You've got to advertise that in a flyer or a newspaper, on the radio, on TV. We didn't need to pay for any advertisement for that sale. It was part of the press releases related to the Telly Savalas Gold Lollipop. So that's how marketers that are wearing a public relations hat, or public relations people that are wearing a marketing hat, they're a lot alike in many, many ways. So there you've got a couple of examples with regard to pseudo events. So this week, let me pull up. Let's see. New rubrics. SIP 2. Let's see what you need to do to score well on this press release. Here's the rubric, and the first thing that you want to do is make sure that you're following the basic format that's in the assignment notes. If you're Ford or you're Toyota, or who's another big company that's not a car company, if you're Coca-Cola, you put out a press release, media is not going to scrutinize it and say, no, this doesn't follow the typical form. However, if you're like me with my size clients, and even when I had C&H Rao Jewelers, which was we were a fairly large privately owned jewelry store chain with just under 60 stores, we had to follow all the standard protocols in order to get our press releases looked at. By the way, we were so successful with promoting various changes and activities that our store managers were doing in their local community. One of my store managers in Cumberland, Kentucky, which is where the Cumberland Gap is, and the tunnel, the Cumberland tunnel that goes through the Cumberland Range in southern Kentucky as part of the Appalachia. The city of Cumberland, the mayor for the city of Cumberland was my jewelry store manager. Billy Williams, we promoted the heck out of her so much that she was probably more popular in Cumberland than anybody else. And when she ran with she was swept into office, let me put it that way. Now, I'm not going to take all the credit, because Billy Williams, I hired her as a manager because she had a great personality. But fortunately for us, the manager's job was, the mayor's job was part-time. Again, remember, we're talking small communities, less than 5,000 in population. But Billy was the mayor of Cumberland, Kentucky. Pretty cool. So make sure you're following the basic format. Don't try to be, this is not the place to be creative or inventive. Follow the regular format. Follow the format that I provide for you with the examples on this assignment. Your headline needs to be like the old Twitter post that was 140 characters. It doesn't have to be 140 characters. It could be whatever you want it to be. But the point being that you need to be able to get people to recognize that you're going to talk to them about a pseudo event, and that they're going to be interested enough to want to continue to read. So that's what we're doing with the headline. You've got to make it attention grabbing. It's got to be newsworthy. Okay? We'll talk about newsworthy in a moment, or demonstrate that your press release is about a newsworthy event. Regardless of whether it's real or pseudo, It needs to be newsworthy. Now, what do we mean when we talk about being newsworthy? Well, it's got to have public interest. People, when they hear about it, they've got to say, yeah, I'm curious what that is. If your newsworthy event is that Harry's mule passed away last Thursday, nobody cares. I'm using a farcious example, but you get the point that it needs to have some sort of public interest to it. A good example, if there was a press release put out today about the flooding in Pennsylvania, the northern part of Philadelphia yesterday flooded big time, and so that is newsworthy, right? Number one, it that part of the city, that part of the country, very seldom ever has significant flooding, and for parts of the city to be under as much as 3 to 6 feet of water, that's significant. How close to the event are we? If you're trying to tell me about something that's going to happen next year, I could care less, right? I got to have what's known as temporal proximity. It's got to be close to happening now. I need to have geographic proximity. If you're telling me, this drives me crazy, I will see crime stories all the time. And then when I dig into it, I find out that it's something that happened in all the way on the other side of the country. Not that that's not important, but how important is it to me where I sit here in Florida? Now, if you're going to tell me about crime that's happening in Tampa or crime that's happening in Miami or Jacksonville or Daytona Beach, geographically, those are much closer, and it's going to have a much heavier weight in terms of I myself considering it being newsworthy. So those are some of the elements that we look for when we're talking about, is it newsworthy? Is somebody important or somebody that's a celebrity involved? Think about my Telly Savalas. Telly Savalas back then, both instances, was a very big TV star. And, you mentioned the name Telly Savalas and everybody knows. Today you mentioned the name Telly Savalas and I've got to explain to you that he was the star of the TV series Kojak and many other, and appeared in many other TV shows. So there's got to be prominence of the people that are involved or the impact to people that are involved. Okay, so next, you're gonna put your press release out. Now, a press release can be the body can be 2 or 3 paragraphs. In the first paragraph, you need to answer all the questions that I, as a reporter, might have, which are who, what, why, when, where, and how. What do? I take a piece of paper, I list all those down, and then I answer those questions. And once I answer those questions, I take the answers and put it into a paragraph. That way I know I'm covering all my bases. So who, what, when, where, why, how need to be answered in the first paragraph. The second paragraph is where you're going to have a quote from somebody that's directly involved in the newsworthy event. Initial press releases should not be man-on-the-street opinions. You want to have somebody that's involved with the newsworthy event or the pseudo event to be able to talk about it. So that's usually with a brand, the president, the CEO, the owner of the company. Could be the chief marketing person. That works as well too, but make sure it's somebody very high up in the organization. Next, the boilerplate. The boilerplate is 2 or 3 sentences about the company. So C&H Trout Jewelers was formed in 1950 by Harry and Sylvia Cohen. C&H Trout Jewelers is a discount jeweler providing diamonds and gemstone and gold jewelry to its customers. That's my boilerplate. For more information, we didn't have the internet back then. Actually, we did it with CompuServe, but there weren't websites, so to speak of. So That is what your boilerplate is. It should be 2 to 3 sentences. Now, you're probably saying, you said that the body could be 2 or 3 paragraphs. What's the third paragraph? The third paragraph is any additional details that you might need to convey to help people understand about the event. So if it's about an event that you need a ticket to get to, the third paragraph might have instructions about how to get those tickets. It might be a way to think about what your third paragraph looks like. All right. Your press release needs to have you need a logo at the top, and you need a photo in the body. And the photo needs to be a high-res photo, or it could be a video. It could be rich media video. Why is this important? Well, because you're giving all this information to somebody for them to tell the story. And the best way to tell the story is with multimedia. So think of your press release as a mini press kit. You want to have all the items attached to your press release that you might find in a press kit. So the picture that you're providing, you're saying, if you were writing a story, this would be a good picture for you to use. Don't use wide angle shots. You always want to use close-up shots or medium close-up shots, and you want to use shots that have people in them where you really get to see the face and the emotion. 2 thoughts here. These are adages that you've probably heard 100 times. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and smiles sell. So anytime you can show the face, you want to try and do that in as great a detail as possible. All right, so that takes care of the photo. Let's talk about notes. So the notes come after you've done the boilerplate. You're going to put in 3 ampersands, and then you're gonna put in notes about the purpose of the press release, keywords that are being used in the press release, the distribution channels that you're going to use for the press release. These are things, additional information. It has nothing to do with the pseudo event per se, but this provides the person that's looking at the press release a little bit more context, and it puts a little bit more pressure on them when they see all the other channels that you're going to distribute this to, and they don't want to be the ones that give a competitor an exclusive. So that's why this is so important. Your distribution channels, that should be fairly exhaustive, and it should take into consideration both new media and legacy media. What is new media? New media is going to be your new media influencers. So could be brand ambassadors, could be key bloggers, key journalists, and it could also be the influencers. If you're working with paid influencers from your new media marketing class, it could be them as well. All right, let's see. Finally, this has got to be perfect grammatically, because the moment that an editor or a journalist sees a press release with errors, they discard it. They're not gonna spend the time. They get so many press releases a day. If it's a small publication, maybe 10 to 20 a day. If it's a major publication, 100 to 500 a day or more. So you want to make sure that you don't get discounted because of something as silly as grammar or spelling. All right, auto deductions. The big one is always write in third person. Do not use I or we in your press release. Every time I see that, I'll take 5 points off. Okay, so there you go. That's week 2 in a nutshell. If you got any questions, don't hesitate to give me a call at 407-267-8600. Hope you have a great week. Bye now.